I am completely undecided with how I feel about Margical History Tour. I think I like it. I will come to the conclusion once I talk it through in this discussion. Most of what I have to say will be spoilers, so I'll just talk very briefly about it and then I'll give a spoiler warning when I'm about to explain mostly the things that I think are either interesting or perhaps questionable. But this is the 11th episode of the 15th season of The Simpsons, directed by Jim Reardon and Mike B. Anderson. Now, ordinarily, I don't love it when the Simpsons characters play historical figures and we have a story within a story. But there are exceptions, and because this is historical, and I am a big fan of history, to be vague, it was something that I actually found quite interesting. And one of the three stories I knew a lot about. One I basically knew nothing about, and the third I knew a tiny bit about. So I was approaching each with a different perspective. But the setup's really great. They go to the library and there are no books, which is just a sad sign of the times, even when this was released. And Marge reveals that actually she knows some stuff about history, so she tells stories about Henry VIII, Sacagawea, and Mozart. And initially, when I started watching it, I thought it would just be about Henry VIII because that's a lot of ground to cover. But actually, the pacing felt really good. It felt really in depth and really detailed to the point where we got to, I think, like halfway through Sacagawea's story, and I looked at the time because I thought it had been on for a full episode, and it hadn't. It was only about halfway through. So they pack an awful lot into a short space of time without ever feeling rushed, and that's a huge achievement. I will also say it's very well animated, which is usually the case, but I feel like there's a lot of detail in the three stories, and different Simpsons characters from Springfield take on different roles, and I feel like everybody suited the role they played. So all of that works very well. The way it's edited together, the stories, go back and forth from Marge in a way that's really satisfying and doesn't feel too jarring. So that part of it was absolutely fine. But the substance of the stories is where I'm not 100% sure. So, what I will say is these are a fun way to introduce somebody to these events in history, but should not be taken on face value. And I actually have a really good example of that applied in real life with the third story and something that it taught me, even by being factually inaccurate. So, I guess everything I'm going to say now is a spoiler. So, spoilers from now. Henry VIII one I was really looking forward to because I know quite a lot about Henry VIII. I've read a lot about Henry VIII, really fascinated by that monarch and his wives. And I will say, part of it's accurate, part of it's definitely not. For example, how he died and things that happened to certain wives, the age of certain wives, there were definite actual inaccuracies, but it does give a good indication that Henry VIII wanted a male heir. He was disposing of his wives pretty easily. That's basically the summary. And having Homer as Henry VIII just fit in so perfectly. Marge is in place of Catherine of Aragon, and some of the others, I'm not a huge fan of their interpretations of his wives, but okay, one bit I absolutely loved was when Lisa, who was not Lisa, of course, was trying to push out a penis. It lasted for what, maybe 6, 7 seconds? And it was just fabulous, and I absolutely loved it. And everything seemed to go really well. So it is inaccurate, and I worried that that would annoy me. But actually, if it introduces anybody to Henry VIII, and they can then go and research and find out the truth and understand that it's a loose interpretation, I think that's great. Having said that, I approached Sacagawea with the complete opposite outlook. I know, well, maybe I still know next to nothing about Sacagawea because I don't know how much of what was told in that segment is true or is, twisted for the benefit of the narrative, as we have with Henry VIII. So I definitely need to take that with a pinch of salt. I think there's only going to be a problem if somebody watches this thinking everything is factually accurate. And the third one is a good example of how these inaccuracies might not actually be a problem because I learned something. It's about Mozart. Bart plays Mozart, and Lisa plays Salieri. And I'd never heard of Salieri. And in the segment, that's Bart's sister. well, Mozart's sister. And I thought, okay, did Mozart have a musical sister? And I googled Salieri, and actually Salieri, first of all, was a male and was a contemporary, potential rival of Mozart. There's some kind of myth or rumor surrounding their relationship. It's really fascinating. I don't want to spoil it, in case you want to look it up yourself. But the point is, that's an inaccuracy in the episode. But I was curious and googled it and learned the truth, so it still led me to historical information, even though it was wrong in the episode. So I think it completely depends on where the viewer is coming from. For very young children, well, I don't know how very young the Simpsons viewers are, but for, younger viewers who have never heard of either of these, I think it'll provide a basic introduction that's quite fun and memorable and engaging. For casual viewers who aren't bothered about looking up the facts, it might provide some inaccuracies, but then if they don't really care about history, what harm can that do? Well, I say that, maybe it can do harm, I don't know. But for people like me who love history and who can identify the inaccuracies in certain places, will then know that, okay, the bits that I don't know might not be accurate. So yeah, I think it's a good episode as long as you go into it knowing it's not going to be 100% accurate and you don't let that bother you. I say that had it been, the life of Lord Byron and it was inaccurate, it would have drove me up the wall. It really would have annoyed me and I would have got really angry at it. So yeah, I feel like it's definitely going to divide people. It's dividing me. I'm confused with how I feel. At the end of the day, I finished watching it and thought, I like that. That was a good episode. There are things that I didn't love, like the inaccuracies, but in all, it pleased me. So I have to say, it's not a bad episode at all. I've decided that Margical History Tour is actually a good episode.